I never thought I'd end up working night shifts in a cemetery, but hey, rent in the city waits for no soul, living or dead. The gig was straightforward. Keep an eye on the place, make sure no kids are trying to spook themselves silly after dark, and of course, lock up the chapel. Simple, right? Until, of course, it wasn't. I took over from a guy named Jerry. Looked like he hadn't slept in a decade. During our handoff, he handed me a crumpled set of rules. "Follow these," he said, eyes darting around like he expected the tombstones to uproot and chase him. Especially rule number 5. All right, rule 5. I smoothed out the paper, squinting in the dim light of the gatehouse. Never follow the singing past the old willow tree. I read that aloud, a chuckle slipping out. Jerry didn't smile. "Not kidding," he insisted. "You hear music, you turn around and go back to the gatehouse. Wait it out, no matter how beautiful it sounds." "Got it, haunted choir." "Avoid," I said, half mocking, half intrigued. My first few nights were uneventful. The wind would whisper through the trees in a way that made you understand all those ghost stories about wandering spirits. Around 3 a.m., dew settled on the grass, reflecting the moonlight, and the whole place had this eerie silver glow like something out of an old film reel. It was the 4th night when I noticed something odd. The air had a hint of winter jasmine. Strange, because it was mid-September and we were well beyond any blooming season. I checked the weather app on my phone, expecting to see a climatic anomaly, but no. It was just a normal, slightly chilly night. I wandered near the old chapel, flashlight leading the way when the jasmine intensified. It was like walking into an invisible cloud of the stuff. I remembered Jerry's manner, that weird intensity. I half expected to turn and see him standing there with an "I told you so" look. The chapel usually stood silent, its windows dark, the sort of silence that begged to be filled. But that night, beneath the scent of jasmine, I heard something soft, almost like whistling, melodic, threading through the air. It was coming from behind the chapel, near the willow. Rule 5 flashed in my mind. I hesitated, curiosity pricking at me sharper than the cold. Maybe it was just the wind or some weird acoustics. Or maybe my predecessor was just messing with the new guy. I decided against exploring further, remembering Jerry's serious tone. Instead, I headed back to the gatehouse, a little faster than I'd admit, locking the gate and returning to my desk. The whistling didn't follow, but the scent of jasmine did. It grew so strong I had to open a window, despite the chill. That's when I saw it, a shadow, or rather a lack of shadow, right where one should be under the street lamp by the gate. It was like the light bent around something invisible. Trying to shake off the eerie feeling, I focused on my thermos pouring coffee that steamed more than it should in the normal night air. I thought about ignoring it, chalked it up to lack of sleep or too much caffeine. But then the ground beneath my feet thrummed, like gentle steps vibrating through the earth in rhythmic bursts pacing, just out of sight. I knew then that Jerry's rules weren't a prank. Something was very off about this place, and I couldn't deny the chill that ran down my spine wasn't just from the breeze. I kept my eyes locked on where the shadow wasn't, as the footsteps seemed to draw nearer, the air pulsing with that now sickly sweet smell of winter jasmine. Then, suddenly, it all stopped. The air cleared, and the light from the street lamp cast shadows as normal. But it left one thing behind: a single, old-fashioned child's shoe right where the shadow had not been. The leather was worn, and it looked about 50 years out of date. There was no way someone had dropped it there in the time I had been watching. I picked it up, and that's when I heard it, not the whistling, not the singing, but a soft, almost tender, weeping coming from back near the willow tree. I think I need to understand rule number 5 a little better. Carl paused, the dim light from the old chandelier casting unsettling shadows across his face. "Rule number 5, he began, his voice a mere whisper. "Never go into the attic after sunset, not for any reason." I raised an eyebrow. "What's in the attic?" My voice echoed slightly in the cavernous hall, more loudly than I intended. Too late, I remembered rule number 2, never raise your voice after dark. He glanced nervously towards the staircase that led upward into shadowy silence. "It's better if you don't know, just follow the rule." His insistence sent a shiver down my spine. No explanation, no reasons provided, only a steadfast dread embedded in his eyes. There was an earnestness in his plea that made my next breath catch uncomfortably in my throat. That night, after a dinner of reheated stew and stale bread, house began to settle into a symphony of creaks and groans. The wind whispered at the windows like pleading ghosts. As I lay in my bed, the fabric of the old quilt rough against my skin, my mind circled back to the forbidden attic. The curiosity was a gnawing creature in my belly, scratching its way deeper. But then, around midnight, the house fell eerily silent, as if caught its breath. In that silence I heard it, a faint scratching sound like nails on wood coming from above. My heart clenched. Every rational part of me screamed to stay put, curiosity be damned. But another part, a reckless, whispering part, urged me up. With a flashlight in hand, my fingers trembled as I approached the staircase. Each step creaked under my weight, sounding alarmingly loud in the stillness. I told myself I was just going to listen, not go up, just listen. At the foot of the attic stairs, a cold draft swept down, chilling the sweat at the back of my neck. The scratching continued, now mixed with a soft, muffled weeping. It was almost childlike. My heart raced, my mind suddenly imagining every horror movie scenario possible. But then my heart softened. What if someone was up there? What if they were hurt? Slowly, against every screaming instinct, I ascended. The air grew colder with each step. The weeping grew louder, more desperate. As I reached the top, the attic door stood ajar, invitingly, or menacingly. I couldn't decide. I pushed the door gently. The flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, catching on old, dusty relics of a past long gone. And then, on the far end of the attic, the light landed on something impossible, a small, rocking crib. From it, the crying echoed. I froze. The air felt charged, heavy, as if the attic itself was holding its breath. Slowly, oh so slowly, the crib began to rock by itself. And then it stopped, and there was a sudden silence, as if the source of the crying had realized it was being watched. A chill ran down my spine, turning into icy fingers that gripped my heart. Every cell in my body screamed at me to run, to flee the attic, the house, the stifling rules. Yet I stood, transfixed, my light fixed on the empty crib. Then the air shifted, and a small shadow appeared beside the crib. Not a child's, too small, too misshapen. The figure seemed to tremble, or was it my hand shaking the light? No face, no eyes, no features to discern, just darkness. A sob broke from it, a soft, heartbreaking sound that made me want to step forward. It was that moment of distraction that saved me. My peripheral vision caught another movement. I swung the flashlight around just in time to see the door slamming shut. Panic engulfed me. I stumbled backward, fully intending to run, but a new sound stopped me. Scraping, slow and deliberate, coming from behind the closed door. Then, a whisper, more felt than heard, that froze my blood. "Don't break the rules." I sprinted down the stairs. My heart pounded in my ears louder than my footsteps. I burst into my room, slamming the door behind me, my breath ragged. I spent the night wide awake, jumping at every sound, every creak. The next morning I found Carl in the kitchen. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he clutched his mug. "You went up, didn't you?" he said. It wasn't a question, The guilt must have been clear on my face. He sighed, a deep, weary sound. I really wished you hadn't. Outside, the morning was breaking, pale sunlight filtering through dirty windows. Inside, I felt a darkness settling in my chest, a weight of what I had seen and what might still see me. The light continued to creep sluggishly across the floor, a stark contrast to the pulsing terror that churned in my stomach. With each minute, shadows stretched like fingers across the splintered wood, threatening to pull me further into a nightmare I wasn't sure I was dreaming. I tried to steady my breathing, to silence the mounting fear, but every gasp echoed like whispers in an empty chapel. My eyes settled on the staircase leading to the upper floor where it had happened, where I had seen it. The memory was a visceral stab, the sight of raw, twisted limbs, the smell metallic and dank like wet soil after a storm. These details clung to my skin, a film I couldn't wash away. The decision to ascend the stairs was a battle between my instinct to flee and my need to understand. Each step creaked under my weight, voicing its protest, as if the house itself wanted to keep its secrets. I stopped at the top, my gaze fixed on the hallway. Closed doors lined either side, mouths sealed with secrets. The silence was oppressive, save for my own rasping breaths and the soft, unsettling drip of a faucet somewhere close. I approached the first door on the left, the brass knob cold and resistant under my trembling hand. As it clicked open, a gust of stale air brushed past me, leaving goosebumps in its wake. The room appeared untouched by time, draped in veils of dust and decay, but it was the mirror on the far wall that snagged my attention. A cracked, murky surface that seemed to undulate softly under my gaze. I caught movement, a shadow, a distortion in the dim light. My heart seized. I was alone, wasn't I? Yet, something whispered in the recesses of my mind, a niggling voice suggesting the mirror held more than reflections. I stepped closer, the floorboards moaning beneath me, the smell of old decay filling my nostrils. My reflection was pale, hollow-eyed, distorted slightly by the spiderweb cracks. But then I blinked, and so did it, but just a beat too slow, the synchronization off. My breath hitched, logic faltering as a cold sweat glazed my skin. This couldn't be. Mirrors don't lag, reflections don't delay. I staggered back, desperate to place distance between myself and whatever macabre game my mind, or something far worse, was playing. I turned toward the doorway, intent on escaping the oppressive atmosphere of the room, but a damp, clenching feeling dragged at my feet. Looking down, the carpet around me seemed deeper, almost fluid. My shoes were sinking slightly, the texture growing slick, water seeping up around my soles. Panic clawed up my throat. My progression back down the hallway was a frenzied blur, each step an effort to escape the pull of the damp carpet, which now felt alive under my fleeing steps. Reaching the staircase felt like surfacing from dark water, but the relief was short-lived. As I descended, the light from the dirty windows shifted, casting a deeper shadow over the house's interior. Halfway down, a thump echoed from above, followed by another. Something was moving up there, not fleeing but following. The sound, uneven and heavy, grew louder, closer, as if something were dragging itself towards the top of the stairs. I made it to the foyer, my previous day's bravado drained, replaced by a raw, primal need for escape. But just as I reached the door, a harsh, guttural laugh broke from above me, freezing me mid-movement, a sound so filled with malice that it rooted me to the spot. Why leave so soon? The voice was gravelly, dripping with menace and familiarity. I raised my eyes toward the top of the stairs. There, peering down with glowing eyes set in a ghastly, smiling face, was the creature I hoped had been a figment of my panic at dawn. Its body, a patchwork of shadow and distortion, watched me with an interest that felt almost scientific. Outside, the world seemed bright and oblivious, the morning moving forward while I stood trapped in a frozen tableau of terror. The creature's eyes locked with mine, promising that sunrise was no sanctuary and light offered no escape. The creature took a step toward the window, its gnarled hands spreading across the glass like sprawling branches. Its breath misted the surface, obscuring its grotesque details but not the intensity of its stare. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, to turn my back and run from the sight of it, but dread nailed my feet to the floor, and all I could do was watch. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, a piercing sound that should have been normal but here felt like a harbinger. The creature narrowed its eyes at the sound, its head tilting slightly, as if listening or perhaps deciding. Then, as if satisfied, its gaze returned to me, and it pressed closer against the glass. My hands trembled as I took a small step back, my movements tremulous and jerky with fear. The floor beneath my feet felt unstable, as though it might give way at any moment. "This isn't real," I whispered, my voice cracking in the stillness of my kitchen, but the well of denial had run dry. The creature blinked once, slowly, deliberately. In that fleeting darkness behind my eyelids, I could still see it. When I opened them, it had pressed its entire face against the window, the skin around its eyes tight, the mouth stretched into a semblance of a smile that wasn't kind or comforting, but predatory. My breath hitched in my throat. I had to move, I knew that. Lock the doors, call for help, do something. Yet, the very act of turning around, of breaking eye contact, seemed an impossible resignation to my deepest fears. When I finally managed to peel my eyes away, I immediately wished I hadn't. My house felt different, as though the creature's presence had seeped through the walls and tainted the air within. The hallway was too quiet, the shadows too deep and still. Each step I took resounded with a hollow thud against the wood floor, betraying my position. I reached for my phone on the kitchen counter, my fingers brushing against the cool metal. I dialed 911 with shaking hands, the sound of the rings hollow in my ears. There was no answer, just a continuous trill that echoed in the empty spaces of my panic-filled mind. Suddenly, a loud crack split the air, a sound like bones breaking. I spun around, heart throttling against my ribs like a wild animal caught in a trap. The window, previously intact despite the creature's attentions, now showed a web of fractures radiating from a point where the creature's forehead must have connected. "Please," I rasped, the word hanging limp in the air, a pointless plea to an entity I knew couldn't hold compassion or reason. The telephone fell from my grasp, clattering against the floor and breaking the paralysis that held me. I darted down the hallway, my only thought to reach the safety of more fortified parts of the house. My study had heavy oak bookshelves. It might offer a barricade. Behind me, I heard the unmistakable sound of shattering glass. It cascaded like winter ice crackling underfoot. I didn't dare look back. The vision of the creature crawling through the window was more than my mind could bear. Tears stung my eyes, blurring the scant light as I stumbled into my study and slammed the door shut. Leaning against the solid wood, my breath came in shuddering gasps. I slid to the floor, my eyes squeezed shut, trying to shut out the reality of my situation. In the claustrophobic darkness, every sound amplified, the distant, irregular sound of something dragging itself across the hardwood floor, a grotesque scuttling like a large insect. I clasped my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes tighter. Alone in the oppressive darkness, restricted by the cold wooden floor and walls that felt like they could close in any second, I was left with nothing but stifling fear and the darkest of thoughts. What did it want? Was escape even possible? The dragging sound stopped, replaced by a soft, wet noise like damp cloth dragging across wood. It was close, frighteningly close. And then it ceased just outside my door. Silent tension hung in the air, broken only by my ragged breaths. My eyelids fluttered open involuntarily, and there, seeping under the narrow gap of the door, was a dark liquid. Thick, it spread slowly across the wooden floor toward me, like an omen. I scooted back, pressing myself against the bookcase, knowing even as my mind refused to accept that surrender was not an option, with it lurking just on the other side, waiting, inevitable.